So Lynn, thank you for the kind introduction. That's very generous of you. And thanks to Meade County Executive Committee for giving me the privilege to be your speaker this evening. I don't take it for granted to speak before caliber of people that you are, leaders and just plain good Americans. So I really appreciate that. So the last time I was your Lincoln Day dinner speaker here was 20 years ago. It was actually March 22nd, 2003. And today, what I'd like to do is the following. I'd like to split my remarks into two parts. First, I will share a condensed version of my story that I shared with you 20 years ago, which explains why I have the passion and the commitment towards America that I have today. And second, I will voice my current observations and concerns about our country and the Republican Party based on having a front row seat to our national politics for over 20 years, and more recently, having a national security leadership role in the Pentagon. So most of you know that I was born in Jordan. My family came from the west bank of the Jordan River. The biblical town of Samaria is my original hometown. So we moved to Saudi Arabia when I was 3 with my family, and my father worked for the Department of Defense. So we spent 11 years there. So the first 9 years of education I received was in Saudi Arabia. In schools, discrimination based on nationality was common, and actually was endorsed by the administration and teachers. And discrimination based on religion was the rule. I remember Christians being forced out of class and having to sit outside the class for the simple reason that they were Christians. And this was in Saudi Arabia in the 60s. Moved back to Jordan to finish high school, and at the age of 17, I've decided I've had enough of the Middle East. So I came to America in 1979. Actually, the day I arrived here, November 5th, 1979, was the day that our hostages were held in Tehran, Iran, in the embassy. So just to give you a point of reference. So over 40 years ago, 79. My destination was Pittsburgh, Kansas. And I found myself in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I just made the assumption there's only one Pittsburgh in the country. And I know that's always, it's like, how, if you're 17 and you have any common sense, how could you miss the state? How could you miss the region? How do you end up in the East Coast when your destination was the Midwest? Well, it's very easy to get lost when you're 17, but you have the verbal and communication skills of a 3-year-old. And I'll share a couple stories with you, and some of them probably still remember them. So at the time, it was very painful, you know, going through the language and the pain, and you open your mouth and nobody understands you and you cannot relate to anything. But in the Arabic language, which is my native language, there is not the letter P. So instead, you substitute a B. So you don't ask for Pepsi, you ask for Bipsy. Because this, and you don't hear the P. And so about 3 or 4 months after arriving here, I wanted to buy a car because it was just becoming very painful to walk to college in the middle of winter. And I was very picky, so the criteria was I wanted to buy the best car $200 can get. So of course, that came in the form of a Model 98 Delta Oldsmobile. That when I rolled down the windows, there was no partitions between the windows, so it looked like a boat when I drove it down the road. But, so I was in St. Louis, Missouri, and I was looking for a parking spot, and I saw a paid parking area, and I pulled up, and I mustered up all the communication skills that I have learned in 3.5 or 4 months, and I asked the gentleman that was collecting the money if I could bark there. And his reaction was immediate. I give him credit. He said, as long as you don't bother the neighbors. And I just went in one ear, out the other. I didn't think anything, but then it bothered me. It's like I gave him $1, and why would I be bothering the neighbors? It's a parking space. Well, a friend of mine explained to me that barking is not something you do with a car. It's something that dogs do, and it can be annoying. Another one that was even more embarrassing. For some crazy reason, the word blonde and blind sounded exactly the same to me. And I've always used them interchangeably, and you can only imagine on a college dorm and in a bar how much embarrassment that can generate. So I would compliment or make the comment that that's a good-looking blind girl. And of course, when everybody at the table has already had 6-pack of beer, it's like, well, that becomes an ongoing joke. But the first 6 months were extremely hard, mainly because I was homesick, but also having to adjust to a new language, a new culture, a new diet, and above all, adjusting to Missouri's mild winters. Winters where I grew up were 50s and 60 degrees. When it got down to the high 40s, everybody stayed home. It was national holiday. The day that I arrived in Atchison, Kansas, the temperature was 14 below. And I was dressed accordingly. I was dressed according to the 50 and 60. So that was a big shock. But after surviving the first 6 months, America became very intriguing to me. Now, the image that I had about America, which anybody that comes from outside the US will tell you, the image that they have is often based on what Hollywood exports overseas. So now, some of you are going to relate to this. Dallas and Miami Vice were the big shows that exported overseas, so therefore, people truly thought that's a good representation of what America is. So I came in, and I was convinced that Americans constantly cheated on each other, plotted against each other, or were shooting at each other. But I recognized immediately that there was no possible way to truly understand and contribute to America without mastering the English language, which proved to be very difficult, especially dealing with the slang, which you cannot look up in a dictionary. In order for me to shorten my learning curve, I disassociated myself from anybody that spoke my native language, and I was forced to speak English constantly. Another drastic measure I took was following the advice of a friend of mine by joining a fraternity. Let me explain this. This was not an honor society that I worked hard to qualify to join. This was a group of guys, basically, that their biggest claim to fame was the construction of a float for the homecoming parade. And they had a theory that the odds of winning the #1 entry in the parade had to do with how much alcohol they consumed during the construction. And it worked because they constantly built floats that got the first place. Two discoveries I made shortly afterwards. My friend Dan Telefero, who recommended that I join the fraternity to improve my language, was in charge of membership drive. And he was somewhat desperate. The fraternity was on probation because the collective grade point average was dipping below 2.0, and I had a fairly decent grade point average, amazingly, and I looked like a good candidate. But so that's a discovery that I made. And the other thing that, based on what he promised me, that it would improve my language, that definitely didn't work. Because in a short period of time, words such as, very sophisticated words such as Budweiser, hangover, became very much a part of my daily vocabulary. So it did accomplish the job. But in retrospect, the real advantage really was developing close friendships with several fraternity members whom I was able to meet their parents and spend holidays with at their homes. And it was a conclusion that would have been nearly impossible to arrive at, understanding the generosity and the big hearts of the American family. Living on a college campus, you don't get it. So when you enter American people's homes, that's when you really discover the real America. And that's why a lot of kids that come to the US and spend 4 years, and they go back and they try to explain what America is based on their experience on a college campus. That's not the America that I experienced. In the midst of all of this, I fall in love with a Nebraska girl named Jamie, who became my wife 4.5 years later. And also, she happens to be blind. So that was a good deal. And actually, if you see her, you'd probably think, yes, not only is she blonde, to accept to marry me, she is blind. 4 years from first arriving in the US, I received a BS degree in engineering. Within a few days, I left America to Jordan to fulfill a 2-year required commitment in the Jordanian military. That was the ultimate test on how much impact America had on me during the time that I spent in the US. So while in the Jordanian military, officers would try to insult me by telling me that I was too Americanized and I needed to go back. They had no idea that it was music to my ears. Frankly, it was the best compliment they could possibly give me. It solidified what I had suspected all along, that I was ready to become an American. I truly believe that once you accept America, you can never leave it behind. You take it with you anywhere you go. After finishing my military service, I returned to America in the fall of '86 with 2 suitcases. One had books and one had some clothes. In addition to that, I had $38 to my name, the fall of '86. By then, the Nebraska girl that I had met in college had finished school and was teaching in the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. So she is the reason I ended up in South Dakota. So you can either blame her or thank her, depending on what you think of me. So we were married shortly afterwards and moved to Rapid City in order to work on my master's at South Dakota School of Mines and Technology. 1991 was a big year for us. In January, I received my graduate degree in electrical engineering. In March, we started a business. And on June 14th, on Flag Day at Mount Rushmore, I took the oath as a citizen of the United States of America. And Tina Mulally and my good friend Dan, her husband, were there to witness the ceremony. I can stand here and tell you how great it felt to become an American. But not in a million years would I be able to get you to feel the way I felt on that day. What a day it was. What a thrill it is to become an American by choice. I do not think I'll ever be able to express in words the emotions that I experienced as I recited the Pledge of Allegiance for the first time as a new citizen. The sense of excitement and joy of being a U.S. citizen was also combined with a greater sense of indebtedness to the nation that made it possible for me to claim life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as my rights. On that day, I vowed to never take America for granted and to serve and give back to a nation that have blessed me with opportunities for the rest of my life. I have discovered since that this attitude of serving and giving without expecting anything in return is one of the cornerstone of leaderships that distinguishes America from the rest of the world. What sets America apart in the leadership arena has to do with our attitude as a nation. In America, there is no correlation between one's pedigree and their leadership and success potential. In America, the socioeconomic class you are born into has little impact on where you end up in life. America is the only country in the world where, regardless of your race, ethnicity, or faith, if you work hard and play by the rules, all things are possible. In America, leaders are secured enough to empower others. From inception, America recognized the fact that you can grow by leading followers. But in order to multiply and become a superpower, leaders must lead other leaders. But in doing so, we must realize that leading leaders is like herding cats. We must be willing to tolerate our differences of opinions and encourage creativity and new ideas. I made this statement in 2003 here in Meade County. We have so much to be proud of as a Republican Party. And yet, the facts are very stubborn. We are the majority in the state. If so, why are the 2 most powerful elected seats, the U.S. Senate seats, held by Democrats? That was puzzling. So it was a downer in some respect. This was 2003. This was when Tom Daschle and Tim Johnson were our senators in Washington, D.C. What was missing is a unity in the party. When you're a majority and you're not united, you cannot accomplish the task. So we united the party and pulled a miracle the following year in 2004 by sending Tom Daschle packing. And then 10 years later, when Tim Johnson retired, Mike Crons replaced him. So we went from 2 senators that are Democrats to 2 senators that are Republicans. Actually, there was one time when the entire delegation was all Democrats, and yet we were by overwhelmingly the majority party. So I do not understand where it is in the Constitution or Declaration of Independence that guarantees success to all Americans. There's a big difference between opportunity and results. America is an opportunity. What you do with it is up to you. There is no guarantee. The most essential aspect of being a good American is your ability and willingness to pull your own weight. In my opinion, it's one of the fundamental differences between us and the liberals. We believe in strengthening America so that there will continue to be opportunities for generations to come. The majority of the Democrats instead believe that because you are an American, America owes you regardless of the efforts you put forth. The results of such a philosophy are devastating to both the individual and the country. Socialism never worked and never will. It's interesting, the two distinct answers you get to the question, how did America become such a great nation? The liberal interpretation is that we did so through oppressive, exploitative, and imperialist means. As a matter of fact, many go to the extent of blaming America for every ill in the world. The truth is, America became a great nation because our civil order was based on what George Washington called the twin pillars of faith and morality, as well as on a deep distrust of statism. The drafters of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution wisely recognized the imperfections of human nature and the corruption that inevitably results from concentrations of political power. That's why they devised a limited government with a divided power. My attitude is this: it's always been that way since I could speak English. America is not broke, don't fix it. And yet, some politicians in the media will tell you, if it's not broke, we just haven't looked hard enough. America is just fine the way it is. It bothers me that for many years we have been doing away with the essence of what makes this country the only superpower in the world. I often wonder what President Dwight Eisenhower was referring to when he said, "Only Americans can hurt America." Only Americans can hurt America. I'm irritated by immigrants who maintain foreign enclaves in this country. We should have no room for those who are unwilling to assimilate, who just bring their box into this country and live in it. I'm not worried about immigrants' children appreciating the freedom of America. I'm indeed more worried about many of the American-born who do not appreciate their country. If every American regularly spent at least a week outside the United States, I think we would come back all more grateful. Trust me, I have been on the other side. I know what it's like not to have America, and it's not pretty. What most people do not realize is the fact that there's only one America left. This is it. There's no one else out there to protect freedom and democracy and help to liberate nations from tyranny. America is worth fighting for, living for, and if we must, dying for. What a time it is for all of us to be involved in politics. Every one of you is playing a part in shaping the future of America. I wonder where we would be if the 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence would have feared fallout. The answer is simple. We would simply have no America. I believe that the only way to preserve world peace is to have powerful, prepared defense. Relying on talk and good intention to preserve world peace is an illusion. Since the events of September 11th, the role of politicians took on another fundamental responsibility. In order for America to remain the only superpower in the world, America must survive first. With that in mind, never in the history of our nation's existence has it been more critical to have the right leadership in place to guide America through these extremely dangerous times than now. Our very existence is a constant threat and a painful reminder to dictatorships and monarchies that freedom and democracy work. Peace and freedom can only be achieved through strength. History has shown painfully that weakness and vacillation invite aggression. It has been said, every time history repeats itself, the price goes up. Some would argue that America is no longer the melting pot that it once was, that it's more of a mosaic board that appears strong and united, and yet it's fragile and divided in the inside. I tell these people, America has already crossed the threshold of the most incredible era of all of human existence. For the first time in 5,000 years of documented history, there's only one superpower. Even the Roman Empire at its peak did not have the global influence that America enjoys today. The fact of the matter, whether politicians of other nations, friends and foes alike, admit it or not, they do look to America as the model for the 21st century. It comes down to this: as Americans, if we get it right, the rest of the world has a chance to get it right. If we get it wrong, the rest of the world is in deep trouble. This may sound like arrogance. In fact, it's humility. It's a sort of humility that comes from bearing a heavy burden of responsibility. It's not easily assumed, and once assumed, it cannot be laid aside. The glue that keeps us united as a nation is not common ancestry, a single denomination, or force of arms. It's a shared set of ideas about liberty, rights, responsibility, equality, and the rule of law. It's a shared desire to get ahead. It's a shared sense of optimism that people can solve their own problems and overcome great obstacles without resorting to force or creating a huge bureaucracy. America is the only country that allows people the chance to write the script of their own lives. This is why people from all races and cultures and nationalities are drawn to this country. Immigrants risk everything in order to come here, often with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Those who are sworn enemies in their home countries lay down their arms, set aside their grievances and differences, and live side by side in this great place called America. That was some of what I shared with you over 20 years ago, and it still applies today. This is how I feel about this country. I think very little change. Now, if I was smart, I would stop here and thank you, but it would be irresponsible of me to do so. And please bear with me for just a couple of minutes. My remarks then were intended to be a call to action in 2003 to change the entire dynamic, the map of politics in South Dakota at the national level. And this evening, it's also a call to action in a much different environment, but frankly, equally as important. So please bear with me again. Since the founding of the Republican Party, almost 170 years ago, it has consistently contributed positively to the greatness and the strength of this country. Principles such as limited government, strong defense, personal responsibility, and free market led to unparalleled decades of innovation, economic prosperity, and military dominance, resulting in America becoming and remaining the only superpower in the world. There's a direct correlation between the strength and stability of the Republican Party and the strength and the stability of America. In recent years, it's no secret the Republican Party has faced several challenges, including internal divisions and a perceived shift from our traditional conservative principles. One has to wonder what the future holds for the GOP. And frankly, one has to wonder what the future holds for America if the GOP falters. There are several challenges facing the party that we have not caused, but we must deal with. The most significant is changing demographics at the national level. The US is becoming increasingly diverse, and most Republican politicians have struggled to appeal to majority voters and to rather minority voters and young voters. Generation Z Americans who were born in the 1990s through the 2010s, that would make them 30 years and younger, tend to be generally more progressive and liberal than previous generations, and they are more likely to support Democrats. By 2024, next year, Gen Z and the millennials, these are the ones that are born between 82 and 94, that makes them between 30 and 40. So you're looking at generations of 40 all the way down to 18, will make up nearly half of the electorates, replacing the baby boomers. That's something that should keep us awake at night. More than half the electorates by next year. I'm afraid the last 3 elections are only a harbinger for what's yet to come if we don't act and act fast. In last year's midterm election, nationwide, 18 to 29-year-olds voted Democratic by 28-point margin. I'm going to repeat this. Last year's midterm election, 18 to 29-year-olds voted Democrats by 28-point margin. In contrast, the Republicans' shrinking base, mostly voters aged 65 years and older, only voted Republican by 13-point margin. Does that explain the results? 13-point margin versus 28. Some would argue, well, yeah, but the 65 and older vote more often. Well, the numbers did not work in our favor when it's 13 versus 28. Very alarming trend if this continues. We are perceived as the Republican Party as out of step with the concerns of younger voters. Our focus should be refining our message and priorities and reaching out to the younger generation to gain their support and their interest in joining our party. Instead, we have struggled with internal divisions, well beyond the historical split between more moderate and traditional Republicans. We have become somewhat more rigid and more resistant to having any compromise, even on consequential issues that have direct impact on our national security and stability as a nation. This divide has made it difficult for political leaders to present a united front and have contributed to disunity within the GOP. And it will carry into 2024 presidential election. If we continue, and I don't take the risk of ruining your appetite, you already had dinner. If we continue down this road, it's a road that will lead us to another 4 years of Joe Biden. Think about that. Many of the traditional conservative voters and elected leaders feel they are no longer welcomed in the party. Whether it's a perception or reality, we must deal with it. They feel that they have not changed, that they're still conservative Republicans. Things have moved around them, and the definition of a good Republican changed. And some, as our Lieutenant Governor said, are now called rhinos. Again, if we keep on going down this path, we will become a minority party and we will lose elections, not only nationally, but local and statewide. Now, more than any time since World War II, a functioning Republican Party is imperative for America to continue her role as the leader of the world. China has long held a belief that they are too good to be number two. And they are monitoring closely the division in our country, and particularly the widening split within the Republican Party, to decide if this is the time to make their move. Think about it. Too good to be number two, what does that mean? I don't want to be just another number one, I want to be that number one. And we're making it easy for them to do so. I believe most of the Democrat Party's agenda is beyond repair. You don't have to look further than the southern border and the economy. In order to fix America, we must fix the Republican Party first. So how do we fix the Republican Party? This is just strictly suggestions. Here are some suggestions. I have 5 of them, and then I'll be done. And you don't have to agree with all 5. I hope that 1 or 2 would get your attention. First, lower the temperature and give our leaders some latitude in creating a message that appeals to the younger generation and changing demographics. And remember, everyone makes mistakes, including politicians. Thankfully, due to the checks and balances enshrined in our Constitution, the blunders of American politicians tend to be less apocalyptic, at least for now. Second, we must remind ourselves that the Constitution and integrity matter. Facts and the truth are not negotiable. If we must disagree, let's disagree on facts, not conjecture or misrepresentation. No enemy is worse than bad information or bad advice. Third, we must keep things in perspective and focus on what's consequential. Contrary to what many think, the sky is not falling, but things could be better. And many great Americans are doing all they can to keep things from going off the rails. Many in uniform are doing that as we sit here and enjoy dinner. Fourth, we must do all we can to make sure our enemies never go to bed unafraid or doubt our global reach and commitment to protect the American people and our national interests. Fifth and finally, I challenge all of you to take your problems to your elected officials and along the way, take one possible solution. Share the problems with them, but offer some solutions. And remember, it's okay to agree to disagree in order to maintain civility. A united Republican Party is a strong America that's impossible to defeat. And I'll finish with this. While working for the Senate for the past 19 years, disqualified me from being the husband or the father of the year, many, many years for missing too many family dinners and school functions. But it's, without a doubt, the most enjoyable, the most consequential 19 years of my life. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to serve our great nation as a part of fulfilling my American dream. I want to thank you for giving me a home. I want to thank you for sharing your country with me. May God bless you, and may God continue to bless this land that I so love, and I know every single one of you does. Thank you.